different school districts in Illinois, helping them create interventions in the schools and consulting and just supporting families. A lot of families are talking about just concerns over their children. And so we're going to talk about this tonight, but feel free if you have any questions at all to raise your hand and ask. One of the topics tonight is just purposeful parenting, thinking about, parenting strategies that are helpful. Some things work and some don't. I always say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result. I have kids too. My kids are 24 and 25. I've made a lot of mistakes, so I'm not here to tell you all the things to do that are right. I think all parents have made mistakes. We can be hard on ourselves. Often we carry a lot of guilt as parents. We want to be perfect, but there is no such thing as perfect parenting. But so I'm just going to share things I've learned, and hopefully something's helpful for you, but definitely there might be some things I share that you're like, that's crap. I don't like that. And that's fine too. This isn't about me preaching to you. This is about us having a discussion about, our ways to support our children. Anyone else get a dog during COVID? I definitely did. I've been doing this a long time. I started right when I was in my early 20s, a counseling program in the Middle East. I worked in Kuwait. And I actually had both my girls overseas. And so I've worked in different countries, and I've been here for about 25 years. I was at Alexian, and then I started the center 7 years ago. And now we have 35 therapists and a training program that offers free and reduced counseling in the community. And so that's been kind of cool. And I spend a lot of my time at just different school districts, talking to them and collaborating. We're seeing a lot of different things, which I'll share across the board. I think most school districts are noticing some of these things. And so we can talk a little bit about that. I know you guys have probably seen this. How many of you guys have seen this? But I do like to share this because I think we have to check in with how we're feeling. And I share this a lot of times with the kids I work with when I'm doing classrooms too. Where would you guys say you are in terms of how you're feeling? You can be honest. 5? That's fair. You look pretty good for 5. And I do this a lot when I talk to teachers too, right? An 8. Oh, that's good. That's good. So you could come up here and good, an 8. As parents, it's going to ebb and flow, right? And I'll use this as an example when I talk to teachers. Teachers, if I have a teacher who's at a 5, it's okay that you're at a 5 and you need to know you're at a 5. But you also need to know how to move out of that 5. And sometimes we might not be feeling our best, but sometimes we have to fake it. I always say you might not like all the kids, but you have to act like you do. And you might not always like your own children, but sometimes we have to act like we do, right? We love them, but sometimes parenting's hard. And so I try to think about one of the best parenting strategies I used to use. My kids are adults now, so it's different. Is I would always kind of ask myself, what's going on with me? Is this more about me or them? Because if I was really upset and I was coming in, when you're aggravated, right? When you're going to go in and just yell or lose it or fight or power struggle, or maybe feel guilty and, plead and cover. I used to try to figure out if I'm not in a stable, calm place, I walked away. I walked away most times, but it was important for me to walk away, because if I was not in a good place, what would happen is it caused a whole thing where I would say or do something I later regretted. And so I just kept asking myself, I knew if I wasn't in a calm, rational place, it wasn't going to be helpful to intervene. And so when you think about, I'm going to skip to this one. Every child's motivated by something. We're getting a lot of littles in our center, meaning we're getting kids as young as 2. We're seeing a big influx of little kids coming through. 2 through 7 has been the biggest increase we've seen in the center. And we got, I think on Monday, about 15 calls from families wanting services for their children. We get all kinds of cases coming in. We specialize in working with kids across the spectrum. We have a whole group of kids that are athletes that we work with. We work with kids that are in gifted programs. We worked with kids that are neurodivergent. So it's not like there's a certain type of kid that comes to the center. But every child is motivated by something, right? And what would you say, if you think for a second, what motivates your children? What would you say motivates your kids? Baseball and Harry Potter. Baseball. Candy or ice cream. Friends. Yeah. Video games is a big one. Yeah, music. Yeah, that's a big one for positive reinforcement. And it's interesting because sometimes we reinforce things at home that we don't even realize we're reinforcing. For instance, I had a young girl, and she was getting a lot of headaches and stomach aches, and mom and dad didn't realize it, but they were really comforting her when she was not feeling well. And what happened is a pattern started, and the more when things would get difficult, she would start getting these stomach aches because she was getting, it's kind of like Pavlov's law, she was getting a certain reinforcement out of it. So sometimes we have to look at what's reinforcing the concerning behavior that we're concerned about with our child. How do you define success for your child? And you don't necessarily have to answer this now, but just think about how do you define success? Because it's interesting, it's going to look a little bit different for every family, but it is something to think about. Some parents will say, I define success when my child bounces back from, falling down. I define success when my child, is kind to other kids. I define success when my child gets good grades, right? But think about kind of what you reward at home. If you're saying, well, I really want my child to be more resilient or to be more kind to others, but then you see your child and the first thing you ask is, how did you do on the math test? Or, did you get in trouble today? Or whatever you ask is going to reflect what they feel that you define as success. Does that make sense? And kids tell me all the time, it's going to be different than what usually the families are wanting to, at least in my case too, is what the families are wanting to define it as. The other thing that we talk a lot about, and when I started the school refusal program, one of the reasons why I created this, we created the workbook and then this emotional development scale, is because parents call me a lot and they say, I really want you to help my child. And they usually start by, my child's really, really smart. They're really, really bright. They're really a good kid. I don't understand why they're struggling. And so we realized it's not so much about the child struggling because they're not a good kid or they're not smart enough. Every child develops differently. How many of you have more than one child? Okay. So I have 2 children, 15 months apart, 2 girls. And they're both different but similar. So you might, if you think about your child, per se, pick one, and you think about maybe their intelligence and where they are in terms of how they learn. Are they more of a visual learner or more of, a learner from listening? Physically, how do they look? I have some kids that are 7 years old but look 10. We have to be aware of that, because that means adults oftentimes have higher expectations on that child because they see that child as looking older, and the reverse can be true. Sometimes we baby the kids that look a little bit younger. Where is that child in terms of emotional regulation? Typically the kids that I have that are really, in the gifted classrooms are the ones that have more of a discrepancy between their intellectual and their emotional. And those are the kids that can kind of fall apart really quickly when things don't go a certain way. So you might have a child that emotionally, maybe they're in 4th grade, right? But emotionally, maybe they're more like 6 or 7, but they're highly intelligent. They look like they're 5, and then they're more of a visual learner. So we take these things into account when we're providing therapy, but it's not, is the child, what's wrong with the child? It's where is the child in terms of their development, and are we approaching the child in ways that are helpful? If I have a child that's a visual learner and I'm a talker, or I yell a lot, or I'm quick to react, that child is going to probably shut down or explode. So it's just being mindful of, what our expectations are for the child. Does this make sense? So think about your child, and it's not always that the child's, like a lot of parents will say, well, the child's not telling the truth. The child's lying. I'm really frustrated the child's lying. Sometimes, depending on where the child is emotionally, that's their perspective. That's how they're seeing things. And so you can say, that's not true. How many of you have gotten into a power struggle or an argument with your kids? right? And then you're like banging your head. You're like, that's not right. That's not true. That's not what happened. And the child's like, yes, it is. And you're like, no, I'm right. You're not going to win because they're going to see it from their perspective. And the more you argue with them, the more it's going to make things harder versus listening to them and letting them share their perspective and kind of understanding that their perspective is just different. Do you guys have any questions? What would you say are some of the goals that you want to achieve through your parenting? Like, what are you guys really hoping to work on with your kids? Like, I know for me, one of mine was confidence. My younger daughter, I really wanted to work with her on confidence because I knew that was an issue for her.
I think my daughter is time management and understanding that you have an hour before school. Don't wait till minute 59. Let's just do it.
Yeah, time management.
My son always wants to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's okay not to be perfect.
Yeah. My older daughter is he the oldest or the only?
The youngest.
Okay. Yeah. Very like all or nothing kind of thinker. Yeah. Has to be perfect. And sometimes when you can think about, that maybe one of your goals is to work with him on making mistakes, work with him. And some of that can be like you even praise him for making a mistake or like how he rebounded, or allowing him to, for some of these kids, they think that they always have to be perfect. So everything less is failure. We also have cell phones now. How old is he, you said? Okay, well, kids are now looking on like social media and the internet, and they think everybody's got it all together. But really think about kind of the goals that you want for them, and it's going to be different for every family. It's really about your family. I had a mom, she might have even been in this district. She told me, I'm going to say it wrong. It was kind of cool. This group of 12 moms got together and they did, I'm going to say it wrong, but it was like 7 to 7. The kids weren't going to get the phones till 7th grade or 8th grade. And the whole moms made a pact, and there was like 12 of them. And they said, or maybe it was even 8th grade. And they said, these kids aren't going to have cell phones. And it was interesting to hear their reasoning behind it. But they said, hi, no problems. But they said they didn't want to deal with that. So it's interesting kind of how some families are coming together and redefining different goals and values of saying, we want things to look a little bit different for us. No worries. What are things you guys are seeing with just kids across the board? Are you seeing pressure? Are you seeing stresses? Quick tempers, reactive, quick to react, sensitive. Yeah, they don't like that. Yeah, bored. Yeah. It's interesting, we talk about just being purposeful versus reactive. I joke, my kids are 25 and 26, and they didn't listen to most of what I told them, but they act just like me. So the reason I say that is because our kids are going to learn from us. Like if you want to teach your kids something different with the cell phones, then you have to be mindful of what you're doing with the cell phones. If you're, temper, all of it, they do quickly start to emulate a lot of our responses. And I definitely taught my kids some things that I'm not so happy about, but it took me a while to realize that they did turn out to be just like me. In fact, my older daughter is a therapist for CPS, and she works for me a couple nights a week. She's great, but it is really, they do, as much as they try to fight it, like around high school and young adult, I'm going to be nothing like you. I'm going to move far away. Well, a lot of times they come back, which is great. But it is thinking about the modeling. I had a kid, and he was in 7th grade, and he had obsessive compulsive disorder, and Dad was getting really aggravated by his behavior at dinner. Dad would just get so set off by the way this kid would act, and Dad kept saying, stop it. He was like playing with his food. He was doing all this different kinds of behaviors at the dinner table, and Dad said, you got to fix his OCD. And it was interesting. We tried something different. I didn't approach it by fixing his OCD. I approached it by teaching dad to respond different, because every time you say stop it, you're just really accelerating the behavior, and it's going to make it worse. And we also worked on healthy dinner expectations. A lot of families are telling me that they're not eating dinner together and as much since the pandemic, that's kind of changed. And so where I think we thought a lot of families were going to be more kind of unified, what I think happened and what we're noticing is more and more families are reporting that typical those sit down dinners where a lot of the family conversation had without cell phones are kind of going away a little bit. So we had this family really sit down and lay out some expectations for behavior around dinner. And it wasn't don't do that. It was when you're at the dinner table, this is the expected behavior. The parents modeled it. They made eye contact. We moved more. We taught them how to have conversations together at dinner. And a lot of that OCD behaviors minimized. Now, it's not that easy. And I'm not saying that that's not how we treat OCD. It's an example of sometimes don't try harder, try different. If what you're doing isn't working, we have to try. Same thing when I talk to teachers. Teachers will say, I'm so frustrated with this kid. Every day I say this, the kid's not responding. You need to take this kid and do something with the kid. Well, it's not really about the child. It's about the interaction of the relationship sometimes. Realistic expectations. Are we realistic in what we're wanting? Is this child capable, and is this going to be really where they're at if they're here and what we're wanting is here? Is that realistic? And sometimes I think just asking, kind of, is that something that's realistic? A lot of times, and I get this, parents will tell me, I want my child to have straight A's. I want them to do this. I want them to do that. I want them to be successful. But what that does, and I hear this all the time when we start to label kids, this child's so gifted, this child's so this, that really puts pressure on the child, and then they start to become anxious. Sometimes too, this child's, parents will say this child's really shy, and then the child kind of becomes shy. So it's being mindful of labeling and helping them kind of develop their own expectations. Maybe you want the child to order food at a restaurant. Some children have a hard time with that. Maybe you want the child to be able to make a friend. Maybe you want the child to be able to manage their emotions. What would be a couple words you would use to describe your child or children if you had to think for a second?
I would say, well, I have two extra here. I have a 7th grader. My 7th grader lately, she's coming home. Well, my boy is more like in anxiety. He has more like slower to learn things and process. And he gets upset really quickly. So I talked to him about it. And I told him, your sister's one thing, you're a different thing, but you can't compare you what you just share. Because he wants to follow the same pattern. Yeah. Oh, no, you have your own way towards things, how it is. But sometimes I come to situations where my son just blows up. He gets so frustrated because he said he can't do it. Yes, he can. But we just have to do it again.
Yeah, that's a good approach. So he goes from like 0 to 100.
Yes.
Yeah. What would you guys say is? And sometimes it is, and it's interesting. I always smile when parents call me at the first thing they tell me about their child, because it's always telling of kind of what's to come, and it's, I was the same way as a parent. You call and you're like, I just want you to know my child's really talented, they're smart, or my child's really anxious, my child's really a pain in the butt. I definitely get those phone calls. But how we label our kids sometimes defines their behavior. And so being mindful that, all kids are smart in different areas. All kids can be overly sensitive. All kids, we have different personalities. And my younger daughter was definitely more sensitive and emotional. And my older daughter is probably not sensitive and emotional enough. And you look at their makeups, they were both very similar in intelligence. But my older daughter she needed a lot more breaks. She doesn't thrive in being busy. She's like my husband, who's sitting at home, probably watching TV, because he likes, hopefully this isn't broadcasted everywhere, but they're two different kids. She needed more breaks. She was really smart. She did great, but she was not a kid that could be going. My younger daughter thrived and going. She needed that. So I had to be cognizant that I didn't have the same expectations for both. I couldn't I had to be mindful that they both thrived in different environments. And you can see if you have a child who's stressed out and they're doing a bunch of stuff, well, it's probably too much for them. They can't. And I run into this all the time where families bring me these kids that are totally stressed out, and they're like, you need to fix them and help them manage stress. Well, maybe we need to look at what their schedules are and what they have going on. And then I have some kids that aren't doing enough.
I don't think it's so much about the stress about the kids. I think that the parents have to be involved too, because I've seen a lot of parents, they avoid the kids because they prefer them to go play video games instead of giving that attention. 10 minutes, or come and sit down with me, or let me talk, or I gotta go to work, or I gotta go to this. No, you guys have to. I think everybody.
Yeah.
I'm talking about American families, all kind of diverse, because I deal with people like that, and I've seen families that just say, "I just go sit with your kid." Maybe that's what he needs, love, attention. It's not. If you avoid your kid, they react and they behave bad. I don't think there's no child in the world it's been misbehaved. It's just the parents that step up too. That's what I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, I think it's different. I think the technology is different now. You guys have a lot different. Luckily, I did not have to deal with that as much because my kids didn't have that stuff. It just wasn't as big. I think the iPhones came out when they were in like 8th grade or 7th grade. It was just a little bit of a different time. So you guys have an added stress that you've dealt with the pandemic and you've dealt with all the technology and the cell phones. And I think kids tell me all the time, they feel like the adults are on the technology too much. The kids tell me all the time, we feel like my parents are on the phone or my teachers are on the phone or this person's on the phone. They said everyone says it's the kids, but we think it's the parents, So we joke, but it really is. And I think one thing that I notice with kids across the board is their ability to socially connect. I think even in my waiting room, we could have, 10 people sitting out there, and oftentimes the kids are on a phone, everyone's on a phone looking down. I don't see kids out there reading books, or I don't see them doing puzzles or artwork where I used to maybe 10 years ago. It's just a different mentality. And where it's concerning is kids are saying they're feeling isolated. They're saying they need more connection. And so one thing we can do with our kids, and they may not like it, is have them go on walks with you, sit and talk to them, have conversations. It's a good opportunity to have eye contact. When my kids were in 5th grade, our school, and I don't think they do this anymore, the school they went to had this manners lunch, and they practiced all year manners, and then they would go to like a banquet in 5th grade, and they sat there and they had to practice manners and etiquette, and it's fun. They liked it. It was fun, but it gave them a chance to learn how to talk to each other at a table and ask for help and order and all those things, which, yeah, I know. They had it when I was a kid. I mean, I had to go to manners school. I mean, I don't know, but they did. It is something that I think a lot of kids struggle socially. They tell me it's too much, or everything's texting. I told this person off, and then you find out it was all through a text.
Yeah, one night, a friend of my son went to my house to
Yeah.
sleep over. I said, I take out the phone, because I said, you're going to be in your phone? What is the point?
Yeah. And they do better with it. That was good, because they actually do better when you take the phones away.
Try to do something else because they don't have the phone.
Right.
Watch a movie or play something.
Yeah. And so it's good for them, and they want to spend time with you. They might give you a hard time and they might say no. But a lot of times, having the kids not, shut their bedroom doors. We had one intervention that I did. Anyone have middle school kids? One intervention, the parent was really worried about their middle school kid. The kid was being kind of mouthy. The kid was being disrespectful. And I said to the mom, and the kid was isolating a lot in the room and reporting being more anxious and feeling sad. And we started this thing, and I told the parents, technology is only in the living room or the family room on the first floor. You think the kid was happy? No, the kid was mad, but the behavior turned around. And the child was more connected, spending more time with the family. And the family ended up keeping it that technology was not allowed to be in the bedrooms, so that everybody had to be on the first floor. And one, it forces the kids to be on the first floor because they want their technology. And so you end up spending more time together.
It's a little harder though when there's only a couple rooms.
I know. It was a lot of community. Well, this one family, the mom said the same thing. But it was funny because it changed the daughter's whole mood and affect. One, she wanted to earn her phone back in the room. I'm sure that was part of it. But it is interesting when you kind of bring it back and you get people out of the rooms, especially if you have a kid you're concerned about with depression. Some kids can handle it just fine. It just depends on what you're seeing. If you're seeing the child maybe isolate more or be more sad, that's probably it's a good thing we're on this slide. It's probably a sign that maybe the child might need more connection. So if you think about your child, and every child's going to struggle, every child. So there's no, you can look on social media and Facebook and all kids look happy and everyone's great and the families are wonderful, but every family is going to struggle at some point. Every child is going to struggle. You think about if you are concerned about a behavior with a child, you're concerned about something the child's doing or not doing. What is the possible maybe like need behind that behavior? So maybe the child is, isolating more. Maybe the child is having more of a hard time. You're seeing more and more isolation. Maybe the child needs more relationships, maybe more relationships with family, maybe more connections with friends. Maybe the child's having meltdowns all the time. You walk in the room and the child starts crying. Maybe the child needs more consistency at home, more of routine, less activity. Start to think about, are there certain things that maybe the child needs that if we kind of attack it by meeting the child's needs, some of the behaviors might go down. How do we teach kids how to regulate emotions? One, I think we have to make sure we're regulating our own emotions because we're teaching them how to regulate. And also, one thing I notice is when they start to ramp up, which they will, the more you ramp down, the more they will come down. And I say this to teachers all the time too. If you get in a power struggle with a kid or you start to get emotional, it's just going to ramp the interaction up, which it's not going to end well. So we have to, this is hard. You're not going to always be able to do it. That's why I used to just keep walking away, because both my girls knew how to push every one of my buttons, because they do, right? And so I knew I had to walk away if I could not manage staying calm and being rational with them.
And is that okay to walk away from them because you feel yourself getting ready to explode and you've been in a power struggle with it for minutes, and it's just like, okay, I need to walk away and reset how I'm handling it.
I would tell them.
If they're screaming and yelling and.
Well, I mean, and I would tell them, when one of us is, we both need to take a break, and I need breaks too. And I do this when I worked at the hospital for a long time in all the programs, and I would have a kid that was escalating, even like crying profusely or something. And I recognized when I would just stay quiet, if it was, obviously if it was contained, the child would come down faster. But if you start to kind of get emotional, that child's going to get worse. And then you end up in that power struggle dynamic. I definitely would say, you know what, I don't want to fight with you. So when you start getting emotional, I am gonna walk away, because I don't want us to get into a battle. And they might follow you, and they might continue to try to get you to go. And I have some methods for that too. But it's not a perfect science, but it does help. Because if you find yourself power struggling with them, you're not going to accomplish anything. I mean, really, you're not going to win a war with a teenager, a middle schooler, or an elementary school kid. Believe me, I know. So thinking about just getting them to kind of calm down, obviously there's certain cases where kids need interventions and things like that. Again, are they more of a visual learner, and you're like talking and nagging and kind of recognize your behavior too? What are things as parents that we're doing that are kind of like escalating it? And I had to do that too. There were things I recognized I would say out of my own anxiety that would just make the situation worse.
I want to share something that happened to me right now. Like, I always could be in gyms, exercising, but I was young, So now I have 2 years not going to the gym. So I had a month that I joined the gym and I'm eating healthy. Like I said, I never feel like exercising like give you a lot of stress out. Stress, so relaxed. But I never noticed because I was young. Now I'm old and I have 2 years and I feel so tired. I was feeling so tired and so stressed out. now my stress go away.
Yeah. Well, and kids too, they do better when they're moving. I think that's a great point.
Like parents, we are so stressed out. We start screaming then, so now
Yeah.
I'm free.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that feels so great.
Yeah. But I think it is okay to walk away. I think if you are going to blow and you're going to lose it and you're going to kind of, and I say this to parents that deal with school refusal too, don't start screaming and yanking them out of bed and yelling at them and pleading with them. It's not, you have to kind of regroup. Sometimes you got to walk away and regroup because otherwise it's not going to go anywhere good. And sometimes it's okay to come back, and then have the discussion when you're both calm. And sometimes it's okay to say to them, I don't want to spend time with you right now. You were pretty rude to me. That works really well for middle school and high school girls. Because then they're like, what? Because they don't realize, right? Because they're in that egocentric state. What do you mean you don't want to take me shopping? I don't want to spend time with you right now. You were really rude to me. I'm telling you, staying calm and like saying something like that has so much more power, because the minute you yell or scream or battle with them, then the whole thing will be your fault because you lost your temper. Versus if you can stay calm and collected, it's so hard and it takes a lot of practice and you're not going to be able to do it every time, but you will see that it makes a big difference. What are you praising and what are you criticizing, right? Like, think about kind of what are the things that you praise in their behavior. Are you praising when they're nice to someone? Are you praising when they made a mistake and were able to bounce back? Are you praising, hyper-focusing on their grades? Think about what you're praising and what you're criticizing, and how does that affect the child's behavior? Is what you're doing helping the child get to where you want them to be? Do you feel like whatever you're doing is helping achieve your goal, or do you feel like it's like making it worse? And it's going to be about consistency. I'm going to go through this one. What would you say are situations that would cause you to react out of emotion? What are the things your kids do that like trigger that hot button for you?
I think name calling.
Name calling?
You never hear them curse like this started in school. My kids never curse, but honestly, they just started in front of them like, where'd you get this attitude? Why are you doing like this to me? I'm like, what did I do to you?
So an attitude, disrespect. Disrespect. That's a big one for parents. That's a big one. What else would you guys say would be? And some parents their emotional reaction will be anxiety. A lot of parents will say they have a lot of anxiety right now. They worry about their child. And when their child starts to look anxious, then the parents want to hover and make them okay and comfortable. And that can make it worse too, unfortunately. That is a hard one.
When he says, I just don't want to talk about it right now. You want to know what's wrong and you want to get an answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to learn to just simply say, when you're ready, I'm
Mm-hmm.
here. But and I'll walk away and I'm going, what's wrong?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, it's when they get at each other.
Mm-hmm.
When it means to the younger brother.
The fighting. Yeah. Yeah. The attitude, the fighting. Yeah. Meanness.
I think sometimes physically unsafe behaviors
Mm-hmm.
can be triggering.
Mm-hmm.
So just wanting to make sure that they're safe, kind of having a better sense of what might or might not create accidents or risk.
How old are they? Are they younger?
7 and 9.
Okay. Yeah. Physical safety. Are there any? And think about situations that maybe cause you to react out of emotion, right? What are those things that cause you to want to yell? What are your hot buttons? What are your hot parts of the day? Maybe it.
Mm-hmm. You're like, stop, and keep going, you don't want to do it, or I start taking things like, you don't know, maybe that's it, hey, go to your room, that's it.
Yeah.
I want to hear it, close the door, boom, bye.
Yeah. You get frustrated saying the same thing over, right? And they're not listening. And I have a friend, and she's got a son and he has ADHD, but when we go places, he's 7. She must say stop it like 30 times. And after like the 5th stop it, I'm like, okay, is that accomplishing anything? And she's like, no, he's not listening. Well, why do you keep saying it? Because we laugh, because it is funny, because my kids are older, but you watch it. And And it's interesting that we do things even though it's not giving the result we want, but we keep doing it. We keep doing the same thing and that's what we do, but it's not changing the outcome of our situation. So thinking outside the box and not doing the same thing, but doing something totally different. And I say, even if you try one thing for 2 weeks straight, see if it works. It could be maybe one thing different you say to your child in the morning, one thing different you say when you pick up your child after school, and be consistent. So if you normally nag about their grades when you pick them up, say something totally different and for 2 weeks, notice if it changes the car ride home or notice if it changes the interaction with your child. And it's really going to be think about like what helps us with communication with our kids, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many parents tell me, God, I walk in the door and the child slams the door or, doesn't want to be around me. Well, why doesn't the child want to be around you? Well, what are you saying to the child? Let's talk about kind of what you're saying. And we all have good intentions, but sometimes we can drive our kids nuts. And I was guilty of this too. And so I had to find different ways of managing my own anxiety, because really it was coming out of anxiety for me and wanting my kids to be successful and be okay, but I wasn't going about it the right way. And what hurts communication?
Screaming and yelling instead of stopping.
Yeah, screaming and yelling. I have some parents that text their kids all day while the kids are at school, and text the kids during the day, and that we know that's not necessarily helpful either.
For me, it is actually, to be honest.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, it's got very comfortable with it. Whereas all in the class and this, oh God, go for it, or go. For me that's like.
For you, that helps. Some kids it doesn't, but I appreciate that. I love that yelling, shaming. Any adults, and this isn't just parents, any adults, even I say this again to teachers, shaming, kind of getting power struggles, kind of doing all those things are not going to help communication. Kids want to feel heard. They want to feel listened to, but they also need boundaries, which is hard. They need to be held accountable, and especially kids that struggle with mental health, neurodivergent kids that struggle, they need more kind of structure and routine. And so often, kids that I work with, because I specialize with a lot of anxiety, so often when we have kids with anxiety, we want to do the opposite. We want to take away the expectations and give them a lot of reassurance and make them feel better, but that makes the anxiety worse. And that's not teaching them how to manage some of that. And so we think about, oftentimes we can get caught in the trap of saying things to kids like, what's wrong? Are you okay? When they look sad. But what we're really doing is sending a message to them that they're not supposed to be sad and they're supposed to be happy all the time. Versus it's okay to feel every feeling under the sun. You can be sad, you can be angry, you can be happy, you can be nervous. I don't need to take those feelings away. But as adults, a lot of times we want to make them happy and comfortable. So we want to make, but that's not necessarily the goal we want to achieve, right? So it's about teaching them to sit with some of the distress. It's okay to be uncomfortable. In fact, that's how we learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We need to learn that it's okay to sit in that discomfort. And I'll say that all the time. I advise a lot of times not giving kids like any time passes in school unless they've learned how to use some coping strategies in the classroom. And once they've learned, then they can kind of come talk to us. But we have to be careful. We're not trying to get these kids to not feel. We want to teach them it's okay to be uncomfortable and it's okay to feel. I even move away sometimes from saying things like, did you have anxiety today? Or, were you sad today? More open-ended questions. Because sometimes as parents, we can be very in tune to our kids. I'm going to show you a little example. Since we don't have a clicker, I'm going to do it like this. Can you guys see this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is one example I wrote up. How many of you guys can relate to this one? I want my child to be happy. You guys are all good parents. Okay, so a lot of times, and I hear this in my office a lot, parents will say yes to avoid upheaval, or if their child's maybe anxious, maybe they feel sorry for the child. The parent might find themselves giving less limits or providing a lot of reassurance. Do you know what I mean by reassurance? Like, you're going to be okay. Don't worry about it. It's going to get better. You're amazing. You're wonderful. You're the greatest kid in the world. You're the smartest kid in the world. You can be anything you want to be. Those comments are nice, but what they're doing is they're not necessarily helping build a child's confidence. They're more putting pressure that a child's might feel like they have to live up to that. And I had a parent one time, had their child believe that he was going to be the biggest basketball star in the world, and he was terrible at basketball. Did not go over well, did not go over real well, but he was okay. What happens in this situation is the child may feel less confident, and they may think that their expectation is to always be happy. And I had this with my younger daughter. I had to learn this the hard way. Don't worry, we have a different, happier slide on the next one. I want my child to be successful. How many people relate to that? Okay, so sometimes parents will find themselves reminding their child often what they need to do, applying pressure, making unrealistic demands, or inflating compliments. What really might happen is the child might start to feel frustrated and start to fear failure of, I'm scared of making a mistake. The third one, I want my child to be respectful. We all want that, right? You might find yourself out of frustration, nagging, or power struggling, or yelling at the child. And again, we've all been there. Then the child ultimately is going to learn to mirror the behavior of the parent, and you might see that same behavior happen with the child. So, and again, I've made every one of these, so I can live here to tell you about it. It does get better. Okay, so I want my child to be happy. You want maybe try listening and validating to their feelings, staying calm, connecting with the child. Sometimes, even gratitude practices. A lot of times families are, at meals, or bringing back meals and saying things like, what's one thing that went well today? Or what's one thing that we screwed up? Normalizing for your child that we expect that they're going to screw lots of things up. Ultimately, the child might start to learn to embrace feelings and feel more connected. Kids look to us a lot to see what's okay and what's not okay. They want our approval. Kids want to make us proud. I do believe that. I want my child to be successful, setting realistic expectations, praising growth and praising trying new things, and not focusing on the outcome of grades or making mistakes. The child might end up feeling more successful and being willing to come out of their comfort zone. Intention, I want my child to be more respectful, being consistent with limits, modeling desired behavior, and regulating emotions, and respecting the child. This is a hard one, I think, for a lot of us, for not in this room, but just across, is realizing that the child deserves respect too. And so I think sometimes we focus on the child as acting like this, but then we excuse our behavior. And I think sometimes the child needs to be shown the same respect in some ways. That doesn't mean holding the child accountable. Child might start to follow directions and display the respect and start to feel better about themselves. So this is just an example. And for me, I can be a talker, so I just had to learn to talk less and listen more. That and being mindful of my own emotional reactions, those two things changed my relationships with my kids. And even to this day, as they're adults, there's certain things I'll slip up and I'll say, and I can tell all of a sudden my daughter's like, I gotta go. And I'm like, I just screwed up. Because we are going to say it out of our own worry or anxiety, or we love to get that last word in. We can't wait. But it does, I think we all know as parents what triggers those things with our children. I don't really know how we are on time, but I think.
10, 11, 12 minutes.
Jeez. Holy cow. Wow. Okay. What do parents care about? What do children care about? It's not going to be the same. No, it's not. It is not going to be the same. So we have to be mindful about that. What we care about and what they care about, that's okay. And it's not always going to be the same. We know that there's different things. Some kids we know that have anxiety and ADHD and different emotional issues are more prone to get addicted to video games and technology. We have to be mindful of that. Every child's going to react different to things. So there isn't like a one thing for all children. It's just knowing how your child's affected, but understanding that you might be passionate about the child doing something, but the child may not be. So just being mindful of that. Yeah, that is hard, especially with school. A lot of kids don't care about homework or grades. So you have to make, an expectation about work ethic and getting assignments done, but you can't make them be as passionate as you are.
That is true.
That was
Mhm.
a trouble we had at one point with extracurricular activities. He went in with he went in with his whole heart and soul
Yeah.
and did it for 3 years, 4 years, and then all of a sudden didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an adjustment as
Mhm.
how do you just flip your switch like that and find
Yeah.
another passion instead. But I think we're starting to wean away from that too.
Mhm.
So I've learned to just,
Mhm.
make your own decisions, do
Yeah.
what you're passionate in,
Yeah.
I'll support you.
Yeah, that's good.
But that was hard to learn the first time
Oh
around.
yeah.
Why don't you want to do it?
Yeah. We have every year we have a whole group of parents that come in and their kids have been doing some kind of travel intense sport or something since they were young, and the kid doesn't want to do it anymore, and it's tough. We have some tough conversations. Parents are like, I put so much into this. You can't quit. We're going to college. I hear we're a lot. We're doing this. We're not going to talk too much about tech use, but just be mindful of how much tech you're on at home. A lot of times the kids want to have those conversations with you, even if you don't think they do. Taking opportunities to have just conversation where you sit and you talk. And some kids are more awkward and more challenging to connect to. They just are. And so sometimes the kids that come to my office that are the hardest for me to connect to are the kids that want to keep coming back because they have a hard time connecting with everyone. So that's the hard part. It's like, you're like, how are you? And they just kind of either say fine or they grunt at you. And I mean, there's really, yeah.
Excuse me, isn't there a hello and a kiss first before you get dinner?
Yeah, for sure. And so, I would say, just because I wanted to touch on this a little bit, make sure you can supervise it. Make sure you can see what's going on. Try not to have tech in the bedrooms if you can. If you can monitor it at all, it's going to just make for a safer environment. If you're really concerned, this is the hardest one because a lot of the kids I work with will get so mad that they scream and they yell when there's limits set, that sometimes they threaten self-harm, they destroy things in the house. I mean, this is a whole nother presentation we'll get to, but I know this isn't easy because I deal with this all day and night. This is not easy, but it can be done. It takes a lot of time. A lot of kids and families are really struggling with this right now. I know it's not easy. It's hard for me. I have to be mindful at home when I get home, not to have my phone out. I try to be careful and just to put it down. Because I recognize it's not healthy for me either. So I know we don't have a lot of time. So I would say, if nothing else, I think recognize that we're all doing the best job we can. There were many days I definitely gave myself an F as a parent. Our situations are going to always be changing. Some days we're going to feel like rock stars, and some days we're going to be like, this is terrible. Start to just think about kind of what your hot buttons are and start working on, I love the self-care and the exercise. If we can get ourselves to a place where we can find our calm, we're going to be better to manage our kids. I always say, even kids that are really struggling at home, a lot of times those kids do well when they're in the classroom. A lot of times kids just do better with routine and structure. So if you have a child and you're like, this child can't control themselves, but then they can during the day, think about maybe aspects of school. You're like, what are the expectations? I always like to say, well, let's find out from the school, what are the expectations they have in the classroom? What language does the teacher use? Let's use the same language. Let's have the same expectations at home. Not exactly, but then it creates that it's easy because the kids are used to that, right? And so thinking about just some ways that we can set some structure. And I have an example. This is, and again, I work with a lot too of school refusal and school anxiety, and across the board. This is just an example of family made. A lot of kids do well with visuals, but really visuals are more for the parents than they are for the kids. Visuals just are a way to stay consistent. So, you know, for example, one family, this was a child that wasn't going to school, but the child was still getting their electronic time even though they weren't going to school. So the family said, our expectation is going to be that the child is going to go to school on time. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It was just the expectation. And a lot of times kids aren't clear. And the parent said, if they go to school on time, they can have 60 minutes of electronic use at night. Parents said, my biggest obstacle is I feel guilty because I believe that the child will be sad if I take away the games. If you have a child who's depressed or you think the child maybe has like suicidal thoughts, as a parent, you don't want to make that child more sad, but yet the child needs more consistency and routine, right? So we have to kind of think about how to put those together. So this is just an example of kind of what it looked like. Everything's going to be different. You're going to have different expectations. If it's a child that you're concerned about safety issues, maybe they escalate, maybe they threaten self-harm, maybe they're depressed. You want to really say, and I do this, I work a lot too with eating disorders and kids that struggle with suicidal ideation. I meet you where you're at. If you're struggling, then we're going to have to bring on more supervision. You're not in the room, you're not with the door shut, you have your electronic supervised. As I see that you can make safer decisions, then we let some of that back. You need to, you know, you have to attend school on time and do all your assignments. I had this little 8th grader last night, and he told me that he only is going to do 80% of his assignments this year. Yeah, because he doesn't like math and he doesn't like the math teacher. So those assignments, he is going to be his 20% that he's not going to be doing. And so mom is not going to fight with him. Mom's going to say, my expectation is the assignments. If your assignments aren't done when I check on Friday, that's going to impact your self-fine. And I love saying to kids, it's your choice. I'm not going to fight with you. It's your choice. Don't do your homework. Don't go to school. But then just understand this is what's going to happen.
But how do you go about when the child then turns it around that it was somebody else's problem and literally spirals out because of somebody else?
Like they didn't go to school because it was somebody else?
Like they didn't get their tech time because they didn't turn in their work, but in their head it was because they, you know, dad didn't tell me to do this and then this person did that.
Yeah, this little boy went so far actually is I think he found a way to wipe out his whole iPad. Or he like wiped out the whole thing. It was like it broke. I don't know, but because I think sometimes you have to just not, you know what, I'm sorry that this is kind of what we're doing. And then luckily all this stuff is like gone. It's a restart the next day, but they will. I mean, you will have certain kids that they will argue every step of the way. The teacher didn't put it in. It's not fair. But at the end of the time, I mean, you kind of know, and the more you can, the more the kids will know what to expect. It takes 2 weeks. The easiest it'll be. And now just out of, before we close, these are just some things that you guys can do as coping skills for yourself. The thing that's helped me the most is I visualize how I want the next 20 minutes to go. So if I'm feeling really angry or frustrated, I try to visualize how I want the night to go. And I try to behave my way into that ending versus like getting into it or responding. If I just want to, before we close, if you need to talk, you guys all know the school counselors, you all know your teachers, you all know who you can go to. When to see professional help. There's a lot of help out there. I would say just make sure that you're going to someone that has some experience in the area you're dealing with. These are things that if you're concerned at all about your child, and medical and physical issues are in here too, talk to your school counselor, talk to your school nurse. I would deal with it sooner than later because there's a lot of things that we can nip in the bud and try to catch it sooner than later. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for coming. And if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out. We have a big location in Arlington Heights and then one in Crystal Lake. And we have all different disciplines there. So thank you guys so much for coming.